The story begins showing the Korean peninsula. 40 years ago, a comet collided with Earth. Since then, most of the continents have sunk into the sea, and Korea has turned into a country which looks like a desert. Set in 2071, after a comet wiped out all but 1% of its original population, who live in segregated districts based on their social status. Not only that, because of the accident, foodstuffs are very scarce. Even oxygen is running low. People rarely leave their homes, and, when they do, they wear gas masks due to the air pollution. To deal with the polluted atmosphere, a gigantic air core was built to convert oxyanium into oxygen. The citizens are identified by QR codes, general, special, and core districts. But those who are not getting the code will be considered as a refugee without an identity. And some of the refugees became hunters and started to steal. At that time, citizens relied heavily on parcel delivery service for oxygen and all their needs. Delivery man, known as knights, deliver the packages and also protect them from hunters. Actually, the knight's journey is not easy. While delivering goods, they have to fight hunters. However, there was a legendary knight who is familiarly known as Knight 58. He is considered as the strongest knight and also highly skilled in physical combat. Being a deliverman is the dream of every refugee, because then, refugees can get a QR code. And that's their only hope. Meanwhile, at one of the shelters in Gangnam, there's a young man named Yoon Saul. He is a refugee without code who wants to become a knight. There, he continues to practice physical combat to be elected as a knight. In another place, Knight 58 was delivering oxygen to a customer's house. The owner of the house will almost die if Knight 58 doesn't come on time to give him the oxygen. Shortly, Knight 58 got a message that one of the delivery men was robbed by the refugees. Knowing that, he immediately went to that place. After arriving at that place, 58 immediately beat them one by one. Even so, he did not kill the hunters and set them free. And also, he reminded the hunters never to steal again. On the other hand, Yoon Saul was in the general district. At that time, he saw a kid who was caught by the guards, even though the householder allowed the kid to stay. It turned out that Yoon Saul was also an intruder in the general district. He lived with Young Ah and a soldier named Major Young. Then, Yoon Saul was beaten by Major Young because he often ran away from the general district. He was then punished not to leave the house for 2 weeks as a result of his actions. Major Young, who accommodates Yoon Saul at her house, is now even more confused to think of a way for Yoon Saul to get a QR code immediately. Elsewhere, Knight 58 got an unknown message which asked him to meet at Gate 8 at 5 p.m. Meanwhile, we see a man named Ryu Suk who is the son of the owner of the Kienmine Group. Kienmine Group is a company that cooperates with the government to build all shelters, as well as the only company that supplies oxygen to peoples. With his wealth and position, it's clear that Ryu Suk lives in a special district, a magnificent district filled with green plants. There, the president is discussing district relocation with Ryu Suk's father. But here, we can see that Ryu Suk is not happy with his father's attitude, which always obeys the president's wishes. While on the other hand, Yoon Saul ignored Major Young's words. Instead, he went outside the district with 3 of his friends to rob a distribution car. It turns out that the car that they were going to rob was driven by Knight 58. After Yoon Saul and his friends managed to get on top of the truck, Knight 8 realized it and immediately turned the truck left and right. As a result, they fell after Knight 58 activated the electric voltage. Yoon Saul, who managed to survive, then got inside the truck. Yoon Saul was not an expert in martial arts, but he instead challenged Knight 58 to a duel. But it didn't take long for the legend to easily knock down Yoon Saul. And then, Knight 58 finally arrived at Gate 8. Then, he saw the air corps that was heading to District A. At the same time, Major Young was also there and she felt that something was strange because the officers there covered up the incident that had occurred in the District A. That night, Major Young's journey disturbed because their way was blocked by a truck. Upon inspection, it turned out that the truck belonged to Knight 58. It seems that the person who sent a message to Knight 58 was Major Young. But they didn't seem to know each other, so no one suspected. It seems like they were currently investigating the movements of the Kienmine Group. Meanwhile, Yoon Saul finally returned home. Young-ah was very angry because Saul often ran away, so she trapped him into the room and immediately locked him up. On the other side, Knight 58 was seen in the refugee district. There, he distributed fresh oxygen to refugees who needed it. Not only Night 58, but several delivery men also distributed fresh oxygen and food to refugees. After that, Night 58 met a refugee who he called as his older brother. They then discussed the construction of a new district that was being planned by the Kianmine group. The next day, Night 58 sent oxygen to the general district, to be precise at Young-ah's house. Young-ah, who really idolized Night 58, immediately asked for a selfie with him. Saul, who heard a commotion, immediately hid after knowing that it was Night 58. Shortly after Night 58 left, some people suddenly broke into Young-ah's house and immediately attacked her. They want to rob the fresh oxygen and foodstuffs. Saul, who saw that accident, screamed, so the robbers shot the door. Then, Saul managed to get out and he immediately attacked them and saved Young-ah. Although Saul managed to kill them, unfortunately, Young-ah received gunshot wounds that killed her instantly. Not long after that, someone suddenly points a gun and instantly kills Saul. Night 58 heard the gunshots and immediately went back inside to check on the situation. He was surprised after seeing several murder victims. At that time, he also found out that this house belonged to Major Young. Her sister, Young-ah, had become a victim in this murder. While checking the corpses, Night 58 found tattoos in the killer's body. However, he still doesn't know what was their motive for committing the murder. Night 58 then remembered Saul, who had ever challenged him to a fight. Then, when Night 58 was about to leave, he notices Saul's hand moving, indicating that he is still alive. So, Night 58 immediately took him. That afternoon, Major Young just knew that there had been a murder in her house, so she immediately went there. Major Young immediately cried seeing her younger sister lying lifeless. Then, Major Young ordered Sergeant Lee to investigate this case and find out who's the culprit. Meanwhile, Saul, who had been shot in the head, was conscious as if nothing had happened. Night 41, who has expertise in the medical field, then explained that Saul is insensitive to bullets. Night 58, who heard that, was clearly shocked. Moreover, he saw a wound on Saul's leg which had bones like titanium. And maybe that's what made Saul immune to bullets. One day, Major Young goes to Grandpa's place where Saul usually visits. Major Young asks about Saul, who disappeared after that incident. The next day, Night 58 went to the special district to meet with Major Young. He will be interrogated for investigation because he made the emergency call at the time of the murder. Night 58 then explained the chronology and he linked this case to the kidnapping case that is currently happening in the general district, and he left from there. Then, the scene showing 9 years ago. At that time, Major Young and the other military were killing refugees. This was done because they did not have a QR code and they were considered illegal citizens. Major Young, who still had a kind heart, secretly saved Saul. Now present time. That night, when she returned home, Major Young was shocked by someone's voice who turned out to be Saul. Crying, Saul apologized and said that he did not remember the incident at all. In the end, Major Young allowed Saul to live with his friends and Grandpa. However, Saul instead went to meet the refugees. He was starting to get frustrated with his life, so he asked them to just finish him off. His 3 friends who saw that then tried to help and they succeeded to save Saul. Because of that incident, Saul had to fall into a coma and his 3 friends always accompanied him until he woke up. Meanwhile, Night 58 and another Night finally starts investigating people who had the same tattoos as the group that committed the murder. He then followed them, who turned out to have kidnapped several teenagers who were suspected as the experimental subjects. In another place, Saul, whose condition has now improved, still feels guilty because he could not save Young-ah. On the other hand, Night 57, who was helped by Night 58 from robbery, was seen visiting Ryu-suk and said that he wanted to stop being a knight because it really tortured him. It turns out that Night 57 is the perpetrator of human kidnapping masterminded by Ryu-suk. He did this because he was promised to live in a special district by Ryu-suk. Night 57 can never betray Ryu-suk because a device was installed in his head and it could kill him whenever Ryu-suk wanted. After that, Ryu-suk met his father to talk about recent incidents. His father did not trust Ryu-suk to lead the company because their vision was different. The father wanted to improve lowly people's lives, while Ryu-suk wanted to kill refugees without identity because he thinks they are the cause of all this trouble. Elsewhere, Night 58 meets Grandpa, who used to take care of Saul. 58 then tells him that Saul is immune to bullets. Hearing that, Grandpa then tells Saul's family origins. One time, Saul's father was a miner and lived in a place filled with radioactivity. Probably, that's why Saul was born as a mutant. The next day at a goods delivery station, Knight 58 saw 57 who was about to commit suicide. Quickly, Knight 58 stopped 57 from doing something stupid. Apparently, 58 already knew that the kidnapping had recently been carried out by 57, so he immediately interrogated him. 57 said that the kidnapped people would be used as experimental subjects. But when he was about to tell the mastermind behind all this, suddenly an implant in his head destroyed his nervous system and killed him instantly. This was of course done by Ryu Suk, who did not want his crime to be exposed. Because of the death of Knight 57, he also announced that he would open the recruitment of a new delivery man to everyone. The news reached Saul, who really wanted to be a delivery man. Then, the scene turns to the past by showing Knight 58 who managed to kill several soldiers. Even so, he was shot down by 2 soldiers. All the refugees who died were sent somewhere to be burned, but somehow Knight 58 managed to survive and kill the remaining soldiers. Back to the present time, Saul blocked Knight 58's car and immediately showed the recruitment letter to become a delivery man. Saul admitted Knight 58 greatness and then he begged Knight 58 to train him. Even though at first he refused, 58 finally agreed to train Saul. 58 then asked Saul to meet him somewhere. Before leaving, he also asked Saul to be strong with his own self. After that, 58 secretly had a meeting with 10 delivery men in the old training center. On the other hand, Major Young received a report that Knight 58's movements looked suspicious. So, knowing that, Major Young and the soldiers immediately moved. Meanwhile, 58 said that Kianmine group tried to kidnap children. But when they were in the middle of a discussion, Major Young tried to ambush them. Strangely, when they were going in, they only saw them who were in the middle of training. That moment was finally used by 58 to talk to Major Young in person. Then, Knight 58 said that Knight 57 was killed by an implant device that exploded in the back head. Knight 58 then gave a symbol and explained that the symbol was a tattoo of the group that carried out the murder at Major Young's house. He also said that their motive was to kidnap children. Hearing all that, Major Young ordered his team to find people with the symbol. One day, Major Young met Ryu Suk who was planning to relocate in District A. To do that, Ryu Suk wanted to see the database in all zones. Of course, the data is confidential, so Major Young immediately refuses Ryu Suk's request. Ryu Suk wants the relocation program to be carried out by his father's company so he can commit his crimes under the pretext of planning a relocation. Meanwhile, Saul finally arrived at the training center for the Knights. There, it was seen that Knight 58 was already waiting for him. Then, Saul was taught to fight and see the enemy movements quickly. Shortly, after the training was over, Saul then immediately registered his name. Finally, he managed to get an identity card with the name of a refugee 34. After that, he trains really hard. In short, Saul ran the first selection to become a knight. He was asked to fight with low oxygen levels. In the end, Saul managed to win the first round. And after that, he also practiced driving a car. In next round, Saul and other participants were asked to send packages. Later, on their way, they have to fight the hunters who will not hesitate to kill them. Ryu Suk and Knight 58 were also present to see the selection. In the countdown, the participants begin to move. Here, it is seen that Saul fights fearlessly. He also helps his rival against the hunters. As best as he can, Saul fights to the end and makes it to the finish line with one of the contestants he helped. Strangely, even though he reached the finish line, Saul was disqualified. And the one entitled to go to the next round was the rival he helped earlier. Not long after, there was news that the participant who had passed had a broken hand, so the person withdrew. Knowing that, the knights worked together so that Saul would not be disqualified. After it was decided, Saul finally made it through to the final round. Meanwhile, Ryu Suk again asked Major Young to provide the citizens' data in all zones, but Major Young refused because it's privacy. After the meeting, Major Young got information about someone who had a tattoo symbol on his neck. So, they immediately stalked the man. Unfortunately, when he was about to be arrested, the man accidentally blew up the device implanted in his head. The next day, Saul went to a special district to do his last battle. When he finally got there, he met Major Young, who was amazed at Saul's determination. In this selection, Saul will be mentored by Knight 4-1 who was treating his wound days ago. As it turns out, Ryu-suk deliberately promoted a boy without identity. The plan is clearly a success as all the refugees cheer in support of Saul. Before the fight started, Knight 4-1 taught a lesson so Saul could find out the weaknesses of his opponent. Shortly, the day of the final match came. The refugees then gathered in various places where the screening of the match would be held by the Kianmying group. Saul is then brought to the main district, where the gas mask is no longer needed. There, Saul also looks happy because the place is filled with green plants and trees. Elsewhere, 5-8 gets information from his colleagues about the whereabouts of the tattooed group. Then, he goes to them and kills all of them. However, Knight 5-8 leaves one person alive to be interrogated about the mastermind behind this kidnapping. After that, 5-8 immediately removed the implant that was on the tattooed man's head. Meanwhile, in the main district, the final match finally started. All eyes were on this fight, hoping that Saul would be the winner. In the first round, Saul continued to be beaten by his opponent. When the first round was over, Saul explained that he deliberately did not fight back so that he could find out the weaknesses of his opponent. At the same time, 5-8 took the tattooed man hostage and he took the man's cell phone. Knight 5-8 saw Ryu-suk's evil plan which will be carried out. Ryu-suk's sinister plan is to lure the refugees together and he will blow them up. Knowing this, 5-8 immediately sent an emergency message to his other colleagues. Returning to the main district, the second round finally started. Here, Saul did the same thing, that is letting his opponent continue to beat him. In that fight, Saul gets a head wound and it is clear that his skull is titanium. Seeing that, 4-1 closes Saul's wound immediately. In the third round, Saul finally can read the movements of his opponent so he managed to land a punch that made his opponent fall down. The refugees who saw it cheered for Saul's victory. But not long after that, suddenly a bomb exploded in the refugee area. This was clearly part of an evil plan that was done by Ryu-suk. 5-8 who arrived late, felt very guilty for not being able to save them. Meanwhile, Saul won the tournament and he immediately remembered the incident that had taken Young-ah's life. Seeing the wound on his forehead, Saul finally realizes that he is a mutant. Then, before officially becoming a knight, Saul had to do a medical test. After a series of procedures he passed, he finally officially became a knight. Now, Saul has a QR code on his arm and he officially became a Knight 5-7. His status as a mutant has been known by many people, including Ryu-suk. As it turns out, Ryu-suk suffers from a rare, deadly disease. Therefore, he continued to kidnap many teenagers and conduct experiments to find a cure for himself. After seeing Saul's blood results, Ryu-suk also orders the doctors to conduct an experiment by mixing Saul's blood with someone who has the same disease like his. After the experiment is finished, the man immediately recovers after Saul's blood is mixed with his blood. Meanwhile, the knights start to devise a plan to kill Ryu-suk and stop the relocation plan in District A. Knight 5-8 plans to take down Ryu-suk and destroy his evil plan. In that case, Major Young cooperates with them and starts sharing information. It was discovered that the tattoo men have had brain surgery, where they are deliberately made to be someone who has no emotions. It aims if one day they make a mistake, then they will not hesitate to commit suicide. Even though they are sure that all these crimes were committed by Ryu-suk, they still have no strong evidence. One time, they planned something involving a hostage. When the hostage was sleeping, suddenly heard gunshots from outside. Not long after that, several people came and immediately rescued him. But at that moment, there was a shootout so the hostage managed to escape. He then went by car to a place. In that place, he contacted his boss and asked for help. Shortly thereafter, his boss, OG, finally came. He is Ryu-suk's right-hand man. Later, the hostage explained that he had been held captive by 5-8 for several days. Luckily, the rescue team came so he could escape. Hearing that, Chairman OG realized that they had been framed, considering he never sent a rescue team. Right at that time, 5-8 and Major Young finally appeared. Now, their suspicions were proven correct that Ryu-suk was the culprit. They then forced Chairman OG to divulge Ryu-suk's next plan so that they could catch him. The next day, Major Young came to meet Ryu-suk's father. There, the Major told him that the bomb explosion was carried out by his son. Major Young also said that Ryu-suk had kidnapped teenagers and polluted the air in the district. Knowing his son's crimes, he finally took a stand and handed over the relocation plan to the government. Knowing that, Ryu-suk didn't accept it. The worst thing is that Ryu-suk has the heart to kill his own father accompanied by the Minister of Defense. In short, the district relocation program apparently was in its final stages. Refugees are asked to follow procedures, in which they must register to undergo a physical examination and be vaccinated before entering public areas. However, what was injected was not a vaccine, but a poison that could kill them. On the other hand, Night 58 meets the grandpa who turned out to be Ryu-suk's father's best friend. Then, the grandpa handed over a map of the location of the main district. The map will be very useful to find Ryu-suk's hiding location. Then, Night 58 and the other knights finally found out about the vaccination which contained poison. Then, they immediately acted to stop it. At that time, Saul saw one of his friends who was about to be shot by the soldiers. Quickly, he immediately helped him. Unfortunately, Saul was too late because his friend had been shot. During the commotion, Saul apparently was caught by the soldiers. After that incident, the delivery men and Major Young finally prepared to attack the main district. A smoke bomb was thrown into the courtyard of Kianming's office. Then, 58 and his team came down from the helicopter and immediately attacked the guards. At the same time, Ryu-suk was carrying out the blood transfusion process from Saul. After that, he was told that his office was being raided. In the end, Ryu-suk goes to the control room with Saul as hostage. Meanwhile, Major Young was struggling to find the location where the president was being held hostage by government ministers. After successfully breaking in and arresting the minister, Major Young asked Ryu-suk to immediately surrender. Knowing that, he also seemed to not believe in his defeat. Unexpectedly, he apparently will activate the explosive button that can destroy the entire city so that the refugees die with him. Once the button was activated, alarms then went off in every corner of the city. All the residents of the district then left the place, as well as Knights 58. He takes Saul away from there. 3 months later, the president finally announced that the construction of District A had been completed. And now, all the refugees were free to get in without discrimination. Then the movie ends.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.